Te mihi nui kia koutou, and welcome to the first of our emergency meetings. I'm here at some distance from core members of staff that will be participating in this, and we should be relatively safe from that point of view. I hope everybody has managed to get through the first week of the lockdown without suffering any adverse effects. We're still seeing the seriousness of the problem internationally, and if you look at the United States, which is becoming the new epicentre, you see just how deep and how serious this problem is, and why it's really important that we have done collectively what we have in closing our borders, in locking down, and hopefully constraining the spread of the disease so that the hospital system can cope. It's still an evolving thing. People are still learning as we go along, but I think we can take some comfort from the first week and its apparent effectiveness. So first of all, I'll call for apologies. I haven't received any apologies, so there's nothing to confirm there. Secondly, confirmation of meetings as the first emergency meeting of the committee. There are no minutes. Declarations of interest. Is there any councillor who has an interest that they need to declare? Okay. There are no petitions. There is no public input. There is no local board input. We come to extraordinary items, and I'd like to move that the Emergency Committee considers two extraordinary items, the first being the Council's response to COVID-19 to date. There have been some new developments which I think it would be useful for us to discuss today, in particular the opening up of the Food Distribution Centre yesterday, and to give you an update on the level of demand in that area and how it's operating. And the second extraordinary item is a summary of the infrastructure criteria that has been announced by the government. We received this yesterday, so we had no earlier opportunity. We've got the actual forms that need to be filled out for councils, for the private sector and others that might have shovel-ready projects, is the term they're using, that would be able to be put in place within a 6-month period that would help stimulate the economy, create jobs, and so on. I think it's really important that we discuss these today, and I'm suggesting that we do these in open session. We will still have a briefing at the end of the Emergency Committee by our officers on other aspects of the COVID-19 situation. So I'll move accordingly. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes.
I'll second, Phil.
That's Desley Simpson I heard first there. So if there's no comment, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Carried. I don't think we need a division on that one. Just on that issue, what I intend to do procedurally with your agreement is to operate as we did last time. When it comes to questions, I'll do a roll call, and I'll run alphabetically down the list on the first occasion, and then the opposite direction on the second occasion, and so on. And we'll have that for both questions and for comments. And then the vote on the items that are before us, I'll do by division, even if it might be agreed by everybody, so that we have a formal vote that can be recorded on those things. So we'll come, I think, just maybe we'll do first of all the item number 8. It's the next in list, the emergency powers during the state of national emergency, and then the next item in open will be the extraordinary item, and then we have one item under confidentiality, which is the appointment of people to Haumaru and to the chair of the City Rail Link. So item number 8, I will move to put it on the table, the resolution in front of you about noting the explanation, delegating emergency powers and ratifying any decisions. Can I have a seconder for that, please?
Second it, Sharon Stewart.
Sharon, accept that as the seconder, and I've got in the room with me, I should have in the room with me, Meredith Webb, the Manager of Public Law, Mace Ward, General Manager Parks, Sports and Recreation, but also the Acting Controller at the moment, and Kate Crawford, who's the General Manager of Auckland Emergency Management. So I'm not sure who's going to lead off on that, Phil Wilson as well, and Phil, you'll be leading off. Oh, Meredith.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll ask Meredith to lead off on the explanation of what we're looking at and why this is being recommended by staff. Thank you.
Thank you,
Meredith.
Thanks. Hopefully you can hear me all right.
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Great.
And we can see half of you on
me.
The
Sorry.
slide. Yeah.
Try and get the angle slightly better. I'll just begin with a quick overview of the report and the attachment. So the purpose of the report was to give you an explanation of the various roles and responsibilities during the current state of national emergency and to seek a delegation of emergency powers to the group controller. So if I just turn to the attachment first, I'm sure that you're aware that two very important things happened in the last week. So first we had the Prime Minister sign an epidemic preparedness notice that activated some special powers that medical officers of health out the functions and the powers of both the CDM group and the group controllers. And in particular, the emergency powers set out in Section 85 of SEDEMA, which sit under the legislation with the CDM group. However, in practice, around New Zealand, these powers are generally delegated to group controllers, and that is normally done via the Civil Defence Emergency Group Plans, or they are sometimes delegated to the group controller during a specific event. So Auckland has no standing delegation in respect of Section 85 in its group plan. And so that's why we're here talking to you today. The report also explains the role of the group controller, which is to exercise powers delegated to them, such as those Section 85 powers that I've just referred to. And we also note that the group controller has a number of powers that are directly conferred on them under SEDEMA itself. And it's important just to reiterate that all of these powers are at the moment in the state of national emergency being exercised under the control of the director. So that's the basic overarching framework. What we're seeking today is a formal delegation from this committee acting as the CDEM group of those Section 85 powers to the group controller. And so this delegation is essential to ensure that the group controller can operate on an efficient and effective basis, and it can respond to directions from the director that are given under urgency. We're also, just for the avoidance of doubt, also seeking to ratify any decisions that have been taken by the group controller since the declaration of the state of national emergency. Hopefully that gives you a broad overview and just an indication of the specific things that we are requesting, but I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has on the report.
Thank you very much, Meredith. We've got the echoing back again. So let's see if we can sort that one out. Okay, is that better? Yep, I think it is. Right, so we'll take questions first of all, and I'll run through, as I suggested before, the list in alphabetical order. So if you don't have a question, just say no, thank you. Councillor Bartley.
No question, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Nothing, Chair.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Nothing, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Collins. I'm not sure whether we've got Fesso online or he's got his mic off, but I'll come back if he has a question. Councillor Coombe.
Yes, tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor.
Just whether you've got a question, Councillor.
Yes, I do, yep.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Kia ora, Meredith. Just a couple of questions that I did send through in advance, but appreciate that was only this morning. Could you please clarify exactly the kinds of decisions that we are being asked to ratify under C? And I totally appreciate these are all the emergency powers under Section 85, but can you just give us an example of, is this sort of a list of decisions? Is there the details of what has been the decisions that have happened since the state of emergency?
So in the report, I've referred to some high-level powers under Section 85 that have been exercised, and so you will have seen the provision for the relief of distress, including emergency food, some action to regulate traffic, and the dissemination of information and advice to the public. You've also seen the information on exactly the activities and the decisions that the group controller is taking have been included in those situation reports that are being sent out to you daily. But it's really the group controllers themselves are probably in the best position to give you a little bit more detail on that decision making. And I can see from the report that in the extraordinary business section that there will be some information specifically on the activities that have been undertaken just in the last couple of days.
And thank you. That probably also will be that will probably be the answer to my second question, that it's perhaps the group controller who can answer better, just about what has actually happened in practice since the state of emergency, and how have those decisions been made, and has there been any elected member involvement? Particularly, I'm presuming that the mayor and deputy mayor has been consulted on some of the important decisions, but it would just be good to get a sense of, if we haven't had this delegation in place, what has actually been happening.
So the group controllers will be in the best position to answer that question. What I would say is that in all of the communications that we've had with the National Emergency Management Advisors, they have very much had the expectation that these Section 85 powers in a state of national emergency will be sitting with those controllers. And you will have seen the reference in the report that normally the position is that those powers are delegated in those group plans, and it just happens that we don't have a standing delegation in that group plan. But as I said, the group controllers are probably best placed to talk to you about how the decisions in practice have been made in the last couple of days.
Okay, thank you. I'll hold on
Thank
to
you.
that question
Just
then.
wondering if Mace Ward would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Worship, and good morning, members. So the decisions that have been taken range from simple things like standing up the Emergency Control Centre in Bledisloe House and coordinating activities across partners in Auckland and across or responding to directions from the National Controller and Director of Emergency Management. So those sort of logistical actions. The other activities are, another example is Great Barrier Air, so that we're securing supply lines to Great Barrier Aotea, securing supply lines to Kāhui and Rakino Islands as well for food and essential medical supplies and other goods. And then on the instruction of the controller, as Meredith mentioned, from National Controller, that is, setting up an 0800 number for emergency welfare, and we've also established a distribution centre at Spark Arena for emergency food and essential supplies, which will be operating on Monday.
Okay, Councillor Coombe, you're happy with that answer? You've got no further questions?
Thank you. It's a good response, thank you. And also, I do just want to acknowledge getting that flight to Aotea, the daily flight in place, was something that was very significant, and I really appreciate that happening quickly, and the officers that were able to make that, put that in place, and provide that security for the community on Aotea.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe, for that. That's that was an important and necessary step, and I think we're dealing on a smaller scale with people that are on Rakino and Kāhui Island as well. Next question, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are we allowed to ask who the group controller is?
You certainly can. That's normally Kate Crawford, but there are acting controllers from time to time, so that takes some pressure off her. Mace, any further comment that you'd like to make on that? Nope, good as gold. Further questions, Councillor? Okay. Councillor Angela Dalton.
No questions, thank you.
Now, I'm not hearing from councillors. I'm not sure whether they've got their mics off or may be away from their mic at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine, Angela. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No questions. Thank you. Councillor Coombe asked my question.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chris Darby.
Nothing at this time, yeah.
Councillor Alf Filipina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, the only question I have is there a direct email or contact for us? I know we discussed last week around getting our CSAs to have any inquiries be sent. If there is a situation, and it could happen, where a group gets set up by the Ministry of Health and the respective District Health Board to do testing, and possibility the use of the council car park, who can we get that authorization from in light of the emergency that has been declared? That's my
Right,
question.
Mace, can you give us an email on that, please?
Certainly, Your Worship. So, Councillor Filipina, if you send that through to your CSA, and they can then contact into the Auckland Emergency Management Office, and we would get that authorisation for use of property. So that would be an example of exercising the Section 85 powers.
Sorry, Your Worship, just a supplementary. I mean, in the times that we are in, instead of me going to one place and then go to the other, why isn't there an email that we can go directly to, instead of going to one step and that goes directly to that email.
We'll just get a comment back on that. Is there a more straightforward way that we can do that, Phil Wilson, perhaps?
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor, we can look at that. What we're trying to do is obviously streamline the communication channel and avoid a load in terms of question numbers directly into the Emergency Management Office because of their busyness. But I'm happy to look further at this following the meeting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, Bishop. Yep, thank you, because I'm more streamlined, just go straight to the point. Understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Very clear, no questions.
IMSB member, Tau Henare.
No questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No questions.
Councillor Richard Hills.
No, thank you. No questions.
Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Good morning. No questions. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Daniel Newman.
No questions.
Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No questions.
Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. No questions.
Councillor Sharon Stewart. So we can't.
Yes,
I can hear you now, Sharon.
Okay. Yes, I have got a question. So, what is the contingency plan if the controllers, if we have, there could be, there's a few controllers, but what's the contingency plan if any of them get sick? I know that there is a list, but it would be quite useful for us all to have that list and to be advised if something happens and who's going to be the control at the time.
Right. I'm looking at Mace. Can you provide an answer on that question?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Yes, certainly we do have a contingency plan in place with alternate controllers, typically 5 deep or more, and people who can support the controller as well in the various functions. But we can make sure we get through the situation reports and regular communications, we let you know who is going to be alternate controller and if anyone becomes ill.
Thank you, Councillor. Have you got any further questions?
No, first of all, I'd just like to thank, if I could just quickly, just Kate Crawford and the staff, and I'd especially like to thank Sarah Stewart, who's doing all of the hard work down in Wellington, making sure that we're all updated with everything. So thank you for that.
Thank you. There are 1 or 2 people in Wellington that will become household figures over this period of time. Ashley Bloomfield and Sarah Stewart Black are certainly amongst those. IMSB Chair, David Taipere.
Kia ora, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions, or one question in particular. The Emergency Act has no reference to the Tiriti o Waitangi, and I note in the report for the Māori Impact Statement some general comments around that, and I'm assuming that later on in the briefing we'll get some more detail around what that is. But my question is around when you delegate this out, and I note we have members on the Civil Defence Committee for Council. I want to know how we can ensure, from a governance perspective, that the controllers are giving effect to the Māori outcomes, rather than just delegate over and hope that that's going to occur.
Thank you very much. Answer to that, Mace Ward.
Good morning, David. So we have set up a structure which we can share in the emergency management group for Auckland, which includes which includes reporting directly to the group controller to ensure that Māori outcomes and those needs of Māori community are taken into account as a priority. But we can give you more update the briefing through Tanya Winslade when we get to that point.
Thank you. Chair Taipri, is there any further questions that you've got?
No, not really, but I just want to point out an example, and it's not civil defence, but it's Ministry of Health, and it's created an issue from my mind, and that is around tangihanga, when the authorities have decided that it might possibly be that people never get to go home to be buried with the rest of their tupuna, and maybe buried at the nearest cemetery. And I find that's sort of gone through without any involvement and consultation with Māori and understanding of things cultural. So that's the reason why I raised this as a matter, and I use that as an example. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think under the general briefing following the conclusion of the meeting, we'll have a chance to address that. That's been an issue that's caused possibly more pain immediately than any other, and it's in the Māori community, Pacifica community, Indian community. I've had concerns expressed. We've relayed those back to Wellington, and obviously, it's a balance between not helping the transmission of the virus, but meeting basic human and cultural needs, actually. But perhaps if we come back to that in the general session, and we can have further discussion around that. Councillor Walker.
Oh, just one question, Phil. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear, thank you.
Sure. I can appreciate that in this national emergency we've effectively delegated powers. Are we going to be having reporting back to this committee around the things that Auckland Council is doing and engaged with, so that we've got some oversight and some understanding on what role we're playing?
The answer to that is absolutely, and that's why we've got the item on the as an extraordinary item, and why we have the confidential briefing session immediately after the council meeting. So on both occasions, you'll have the opportunity to hear from officials, a few comments from me as well, and the chance to have input into what we're doing, why we're doing it. I am trying to ring councillors individually, but I'm finding that my days are pretty full from really from 7 to 7. So my apologies if I haven't got to everybody on that front.
Just a further question then around the confidential briefings. Obviously, we've had those at least on one occasion. Quite a bit of the material in the briefings would be of interest to the public. Is there any mechanism whereby we can inform people about some of the good work that we're doing?
Absolutely, and that's coming through our comms unit, through our daily briefings that we're getting from comms, and the public statements that I'm making, often in conjunction with other councillors. And again, one of the reasons I think we've got this response in public session is because I think it's important that people know the various things that Council is doing as part of a New Zealand Inc. effort to address the crisis that we're facing at the moment. We're obviously in health not the lead player. As you'd expect, that's the Ministry of Health. The government has many of the levers that need to be pulled, but there are roles key roles that councils are playing as well, and we'll address some of those on the next item on the agenda.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor John Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. In terms of the various actors who've been activated by the declaration, there's a reference made to local civil defence emergency groups. Now, I'm assuming that that's not any of the few groups that currently remain that work locally across Auckland. So we do have some local civil defence groups, a lot less than used to be the case, I might add. Do they have any role in terms of this activation?
Okay, I'm just wondering who the best person to answer that one. Mace is stand up. Mace, if you'd like to comment on that, please.
Good morning, Councillor Watson. Yes, they may be called on to assist, but our primary function at the moment is welfare. So our volunteer team in Auckland Emergency Management may be calling on those local emergency management groups to assist.
Okay, just a quick follow-up, Phil. It might be useful for councillors to have a list of any such groups that do exist across Auckland and in which particular wards they're operating, just for our potential use or knowledge anyway.
Thank you. I'll ask Mace to respond to councillors with that list when they can put it together. Further questions, councillor?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Young.
No question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Thank you very much for that. We'll, as I suggested before, we'll work in reverse order now for any comments. So just please respond if you don't need to comment. So we'll start, Councillor Young, with you again. Any comments on the paper?
No, thank you.
Councillor Watson?
No comment.
Councillor Walker?
No comment.
Councillor IMSB Chair Taipere?
No comment.
Councillor Stewart?
No comment.
Councillor Simpson?
No comment.
Councillor Sayers?
No comment, Your Worship. Thank you.
Councillor Newman?
No comment.
Councillor Mulholland?
No comment.
Councillor Hills?
No, thank you.
Councillor Henderson?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
IMSB member, Councillor Henare?
Thanks for the councillor.
Sorry, did I say councillor again? I thought I said IMSB member.
Okay. That's okay, made my day. No comment, Your Worship.
Thank you. The salary didn't go with that, unfortunately. Councillor Fletcher?
No comment.
Councillor Filipina?
None.
Councillor Darby?
Nothing from me.
Councillor Dalton?
No comment.
Councillor Cooper?
Nothing further, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Coombe?
No comment, thank you.
Councillor Collins?
No comment, thanks, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore?
Just to say, Mr. Mayor, well done to the staff that have swung this process in smoothly and cleanly, and it's well thought out and thought through. I'm sure the information that we look forward to coming will be coming in due course, so thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Casey?
No comment, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bartley?
No comment, Mr. Mayor, except to say good work, Meredith. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And that means that we can now come to the resolution. The resolution, the recommendation is on the screen in front of you, and I'll ask Sandra to take a division call on this, please.
Yes, councillors, you are voting on the clauses in front of you. Please be clear with your answer so we can get that recorded correctly. Mayor Goff.
Yes.
Councillor Bartley.
Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Dalton.
Aye.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
5.
Councillor Fletcher.
4.
IMSB member Henare.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
4.
Councillor Hills.
Aye, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
4.
Councillor Newman.
4.
Councillor Sayers.
4.
Councillor Simpson.
4.
Councillor Stewart.
4.
IMSB Chair Taipere.
4.
Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Young.
4.
That was unanimous.
We don't need to tally that one up. That's passed unanimously. We'll now move to item 9, consider.
Got my mic here. I've listed 2 areas that I think we should deal with separately. The first is Council's overall response to COVID-19, and then I'll come back to, as a separate part of this item, the infrastructure criteria that the government has announced. So if we begin on the Council's response, and Councillor Walker, quite appropriately, you asked about what we're doing in this area, and I'll ask our officers to address it under a number of different categories. I think probably you don't need to take them separately. The first and the critical thing is we're maintaining our essential services, water, waste and fresh water, collection of waste, the core services through Auckland Transport, and so on. The second was the Meals for the Homeless initiative, and thank you very much, councillors, for the warm support that you gave to that. Just an indication of interest in it. On the posting I put on my Facebook, I think I got 57,000 reaches and close to 1,500 likes. So clearly there was a lot of interest and support for that. What brought this item up in particular was the opening of the Food Distribution Centre, which was at the request of the National Emergency Management Agency. That started yesterday with our call centre, manned by our normal call centre workers, taking well over 1,000 calls, specifically on the need for food parcels, 1,000 calls. And the distribution centre is being established right now. We will be bringing the food that constitute the parcels into that tomorrow, and the parcels will be delivered by Monday, or starting on Monday. That again is a big effort. I think we were one of the first 2 councils in the country, Mace, to get up and running at the request of the National Emergency Management Agency, which is, I think, demonstrates the effectiveness of our council in responding to those calls, and that's going to be a really important part in ensuring the sort of people we're targeting at the moment are those who have lost their jobs, and sadly, day by day, we just see more and more job losses, but are not yet plugged into the Ministry of Social Development agencies to be getting support. So we are providing the interim support that people often quite desperately need to get food on the table for themselves and their kids. I'll get Tanya in response to David Taipure's question to talk about the Māori community response. And the other thing, of course, is just getting the information across to the community. But Mace, if I can ask you to lead off on this item, and then maybe Tanya, if I can get you to add in on the Māori community response aspect of it. Thank you. Mace.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and councillors, members of Chair Taipere. Certainly since March 25th, there's been a significant amount of activity. The types of activity that have been undertaken by Auckland Emergency Management and other staff include staff attached to the Ministry of Health undertaking health checks of international returning travellers. In addition to that, we are also coordinating with other agencies, most notably being health-led, 8 hotels in the Manukau area that are catering for returning travellers either for quarantine in one hotel or isolation facilities where those travellers don't have an isolation plan in place. So that's a significant piece of work. Staff also, as His Worship mentioned, assisting with the distribution by the City Mission to the homeless who have housed vulnerable families they support. Maintaining targeted public toilets that are used by essential workers, particularly for truck drivers and bus drivers, but also others that are out and about. So we have reduced that right down. We're at 57 public toilets at present. The deployment of staff in the call centre to maintain the 0800 number for emergency welfare and basic food parcels and toiletries, and for those Aucklanders experiencing hardship. So these are Aucklanders who aren't already clients or attached to other welfare support or being looked after in their local community. As the Mayor said, 1,018 calls on the 1st of April yesterday. Most of those calls for emergency basic food items. Some of the calls were for other issues relating to medical needs, and they were re-referred onto the appropriate agencies. But of the 3,440 calls received by the call centre yesterday, 54% of those calls were concerning some element of COVID-19, so a high level of interest in what's happening. Our public information and communications has had an extensive provision for information to Auckland around COVID-19, and as you will have noted, perhaps the online version of our Auckland and the news site has been converted or repurposed to really provide updated information and that we're getting from the Ministry of Health and also the National Emergency Management Agency, and particular to Auckland. And that's been very helpful for the work that I've been leading in the last week, and Kate Crawford's led before that. We've established staffing of our Emergency Coordination Centre, including a group controller reporting to the National Controller, and a roster of group controllers for the foreseeable 4 weeks, or 3 remaining weeks. That will include Rachel Callagher, who's on your list as a group controller, Kate Crawford as General Manager of Auckland Emergency Management, of course, and myself. And then we have some redundancy there as well, or a contingency that was mentioned by Councillor Stewart. So we have 2 key roles. One is the coordination of the welfare response in Auckland, and I've described what we're doing in that regard for emergency food packages, and other welfare for particularly homeless has been a real focus, and those staff that are seconded to Ministry of Health and Ministry of Social Development as well. Many of those staff come from our frontline services such as libraries and arts, community and events teams. So redeployment of Auckland Council staff has been critical in meeting the needs of welfare of Aucklanders. The second response has been that general response to Auckland emergency management operations, and we've been undertaking that in terms of logistics and the like. Staff are also attached to the Northern Regional Health Coordination Centre with the New Zealand Police and Green Lane at the Green Lane Clinical Centre. I'm aware through that attachment and liaison that hospitals in Auckland and Northland are at 60% capacity, so there is quite a lot of room and redundancy at present to enable any response, and there's been other work done to cater for any ICU or acute response. Staff are currently planning more deployment to Ministry of Social Development for those Aucklanders who are considered vulnerable, those people aged over 70 in particular, who don't have an email contact or other means of contacting or seeing what the updates are on websites, and that initiative's expected to commence early next week. And the last thing is just to return to, we are standing up the Emergency Management Centre 7 days a week between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. at the direction of the National Controller. So that's fine. Your Worship, I'll hand over to Tanya in terms of the Pauwhakarehe response.
Thank you. I'll ask Tanya to take over now, and then maybe Ian, if we come back to you if there's other things that you need to add in. Tanya, please.
Thank you. Tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou. E ngā mema o te poare, tēnā kōrua ngā mihi nui te kaupapa o te poari tēnei wā. Tēnā tātou. Just to give you an update on what we've been doing in terms of establishing a new PO called PO Whakarai. This sits within Auckland Emergency Management. The staff who are currently working there, we've set it up, we've been going for about a week now, and the staff who are currently working in there come from a mixture of Te Waka Angamua, Auckland Emergency Management and the Southern Initiative, and we also have some staff who have joined us from the Maunga Authority. So these are people who know our Māori communities across Tāmaki, and they understand them. So what we didn't want to do is waste time having to work alongside all the other agencies trying to work out who the networks are in Tāmaki. We know those. And so this is specifically to deal with anything Māori related and COVID-19. So we're embedded within Auckland Emergency Management, and we coordinate any engagement with iwi, hapu, whānau and Māori to ensure that we're taking a targeted approach to our Māori communities across Tāmaki Makaurau at this time. To support Māori-led responses, which is the feedback that we're getting, that Māori want to lead, they don't want to be told what to do. We need to know what's happening in order to make sure that we're directing our resources where they're needed. We're utilising all our existing networks to reach out to Māori communities and gauge their needs. We've seen the benefits of having a Māori-led response through other situations, and we're listening to Māori and being led by what they tell us. Member Taipari, as you said, tangihanga has been a consistent issue, and we are connected to those central government networks as well, and so subject to some advocacy that happened, particularly with the National Iwi Chairs Forum, you would have seen that some of those rules changed. So there is a network who are advocating through the current structure and outside of the current structure. Māori are also saying that they really want fit-for-purpose communications, and so what we've been doing is coordinating some of the information that's already there, so Ministry of Health approved, but coming out of the likes of the National Pandemic Group, the website Uruta in particular has been very useful for Māori. We've been working with them to plan and help them deal with agencies in an appropriate way for them. For example, one of the initiatives that the Auckland Emergency Management Team and Te Waka Angamua and others had been supporting before we got into level 4 was the establishment of a marae network, Te Kotahi Tāmaki, working with Te Ropu or Waiora, which is a membership of Māori who have disabilities and also kaumātua, getting them ready to be able to respond to the communities that they know best. Māori are also asking about how do they support whānau during this time, particularly kaumātua, and there have been some requests around kai, but we also know that iwi are looking to provide leadership, and as part of the new structure we have a po tangata, and I'm holding that space open at the moment while we start to have the kōrero with iwi about how they would like to be involved. So we're managing inquiries and requests. We've got an email address up and running, so some of you may have seen that. That's akgeoc.po-whakarai at aucklandcouncil.govt.nz. Now that the 0800 number is also operating, we'll be working alongside the welfare function to ensure that we're applying a Māori lens across things. We've got about 20 core staff who have been working to set up the PO. We have lots of staff who are really keen to be redeployed to help out in those communities. So the other thing that we're doing is putting a lens across all the R's: reduction, readiness, response and recovery of emergency management, to ensure that we're capturing how those efforts are supporting Māori communities in Tāmaki Makaurau, but more than that, understanding where the gaps might be so that we can place our resource in the right place. Tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Ian, anything that you'd like to add to the comments made already?
Sure. Look, thank you, Your Worship. So clearly you've heard about what we're doing as an organisation to support the communities across Auckland and by transferring staff and seconding people to work in other areas. But we also have a wide range of essential services that the Auckland Council Group is responsible for. So they include obvious things like water, transport, waste, cemeteries, animal management, the Auckland Zoo. There's a number of them. And right across those essential services, teams have been split, so specialised staff and personnel who are involved in the core delivery of those services are no longer working as single teams. The teams have been split. To date, we only have one case of COVID across the Auckland group. We expect that will change in time, but right now we only have one, and we wish to avoid a situation where if we do get a case, we don't lose a whole team that provides an essential service. So the approach of splitting teams has been taken right across all of our essential services. In fact, some of our services have gone to the extent, and the Auckland Zoo is a good example, where if it comes to the crunch, the folk who look after the Auckland Zoo animals will be living in the zoo with their animals away from their families. So there's a lot of dedication there to ensure that those sorts of services are maintained. Perhaps the most not difficult area, but the area we need to focus on is the skilled personnel that are necessary to maintain these services. And we're also working with local government New Zealand because there are other local government units across the country with very small numbers of skilled personnel, for example, in the water engineering area. And it may be that there's opportunities there that skills can be shared should the situation demand it. So we are working across the country. We're very much focusing on having skilled personnel and ensuring we don't lose a lot of skilled personnel because of one or two outbreaks of COVID, so that those essential services can be maintained.
Thank you very much, Ian. Look, we'll go through the question list for this section of the extraordinary items alphabetically again. If I could just ask the first question, Ian, you mentioned that there's one person across the group that has been infected by COVID-19. I just wanted you to clarify that is not a person, though, that has had contact since becoming contagious with other members of the council group. Could you comment on that?
Yes, that's correct. Actually, we've congratulated the person feeling unwell, got in contact with us, did not come into work, self-isolated, got themselves checked, found out they were positive and stayed home. So it's exactly the approach that not only the government communications are encouraging, but our own communications. And so that's exactly the sort of response we want our staff to engage in. So no, there was no link back into our organisation from that person.
Thank you very much. So, first of all, Councillor Bartley, questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can't see the video, but about those Māori in our communities who are not connected with a marae or, aren't getting any iwi assistance, and how we can support that part of the Māori community, and also can get those same messages so that we can put them out to our communities that are doing coordinated local responses.
Thank you. Absolutely, Councillor. We just got approval the other day from the controller to start our outreach, and so getting some of those key messages out to the communities will be absolutely vital. The other reason for having that central coordination point is because iwi, a lot of iwi are actually quite sophisticated. It's making sure that we have a nice, easy way to cater for all Māori communities in Tāmaki Makaurau. And even if there's nothing that we can specifically do, we can certainly direct them to the right agency or the right answer to stop them having to bump around a number of agencies.
Thank you. Can I just suggest at this stage, because I know it's a time thing, that every councillor has the chance to ask one question and perhaps a supplementary to that. So if you can be thinking what your most important question is, and that means that we can get through in a reasonably efficient way. Councillor Casey.
Thanks, Your Worship. My questions relate to. Can you hear me okay? Yep.
Yep. Yeah, it's a bit of a rough line, Kathy, but we're okay. Yeah.
Okay. My questions relate to our cemeteries and crematoria. A couple of questions, Mace. Are we allowing people to visit graves at the moment? That's number one. And number two is, I want to hear about the readiness for an increase in crematoria services and the readiness of our staff, because it'll be a really difficult time for them.
Mace, thank you.
Can't hear.
Sorry, Mace, have you got your mic on, please?
Apologies.
Yeah.
Councillor Casey, we do have a plan for our cemeteries in terms of capacity. So we have over 10,000 burial plots available across the region, largely centred around the three significant hub cemeteries of Manukau Memorial Gardens, Waikimete, which is relatively modest, and North Shore Memorial Park. We also have 6 cremators based in those 3 locations as well. In addition to that, we are aware of the capacity that exists on private cemeteries and in private cremation and funeral homes. So we do have sufficient capacity should the worst happen through this pandemic. We have also done quite a lot of planning with Ministry of Health and others in terms of how we maintain our staff's health and well-being during burial or cremation activities. So working together with Funeral Directors Association as well to do that. We have 3 teams of sextons who are on a roster, and we have what's been colloquially called a 5 deep list that can be called on to assist, including contractors if that's necessary for mitigation and contingency. People are able to visit cemeteries still, although, as you will appreciate, during burial and cremation services, we are controlling the people who are able to visit with a burial, and that is limited as prescribed by the Ministry of Health to those people whom have been in the bubble of the person who is deceased, and we are escorting them into the cemeteries for those services at that time. In addition, we've put in place, together with funeral directors but also ourselves, taking photographs of the caskets and any photographs of the ceremony of burial and the last rites being delivered at the burial site or at the crematoria, and allowing, where the funeral director wishes to, a 2-way streaming option for families as well.
Thanks, Mace. Just one supplementary. How many staff do we have currently scheduled to work in our cemeteries and crematoria? What's the size of that workforce?
At the moment, we have 30 people, ranging from administration through to operational staff, and then we have ability to call on a further 60 through contractors and other staff within the organisation with the types of skills that would be required.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a question concerning water tankers, the service that was delivering through Healthy Waters to our rural communities in the northwest, northeast, and the south. I presume that's going on a needs-be basis.
Yes, it's Ian Maxwell here. Yes, the existing services undertaken in association with the drought are continuing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I read somewhere 350 million litres had been delivered through the supplementary tankers we put on. And everybody will be aware of the briefing we've had from Watercare to show that we are down to about 53% at the moment. It's still not in panic territory, but the message is going out to everybody. Don't wash your house, don't wash your car, don't water your garden, but do wash your hands. So if we keep to that mantra. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mayor. My questions have been asked by Councillor Casey with the cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And kia ora koutou, Tanya, Mason, Ian. Thank you for the update and the tremendous work that has been underway leading Council's response. This was the question that I had that I directed at Meredith, but it's probably more appropriate for you, Mace, was can you just clarify what has been happening since the emergency was put in place in terms of the decision making and the involvement of elected members? So I appreciate there's been a lot of decisions, but where has it been possible, for example, to consult with the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, and how has that happened?
Yes, good morning again, Councillor Coombe. So there have been regular briefings with the Mayor around what has happened, and in some cases, however, we are given specific directions by the Director of Emergency Management, but we've been also communicating those in the daily governance updates to the Mayor and Deputy Mayor, and then additionally to stakeholder updates and elected member updates at the end of each day.
Thank you. I think it's just good to know, because we've just signed off the delegation, just what has been happening prior to that. So, kia ora, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor
Are you there, Linda?
Yes, I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions, and it's regarding the 0800 number. I'm wondering when people are coming through the 0800 number, that there's an opportunity, or you may be doing this already, of assessing where they sit within a cohort. So we've got a whole new cohort of people who are vulnerable, and not used to negotiating or navigating the social welfare system. So people who have lost their jobs and people who have had their salaries cut considerably down to a subsidy now. I wonder how we can get a feel of how many of those people are as a percentage of the calls coming through, as opposed to perhaps the more vulnerable that we regularly would expect to hear from. Is there an opportunity to do that? Because I think that matters, and when we're going to allocate resource, particularly for redirecting and connecting those people to get the help that they need, that they're not really aware of where to go for that.
Thank you. That's a very good question that I put to Mace myself yesterday. And maybe if you could touch, Mace, in addition to that, on the contact we've had with ordinary food banks dealing with their normal clients.
Yes, Your Worship, and thank you for the question, Angela. We are asking a series of questions which triage people in terms of their need, and where their need, what we're attempting to do in the case for this welfare is in response to the COVID-19 emergency. So this is bridging people between finding themselves in a position, as you say, where they're not used to navigating the normal social and welfare supports. So bridging that through to being able to have a much longer term, more sustainable support from the normal agencies. So we are, in some cases, as I mentioned, and I don't have the numbers at the end of yesterday, but approximately 25% of the people on the calls up until 3 o'clock yesterday were being redirected to other agencies where they could receive other assistance other than the emergency food supplies.
If I may just have a supplementary about how we might be able to deliver some messaging, because I think sometimes the messaging has been fantastic and everyone's doing an incredible job. but sometimes it is targeted to our most vulnerable, rightly so, but we've got this new cohort who need to hear from us. We acknowledge you as somebody who has lost their job or is now on a subsidy, and all of a sudden they don't know where to go to get this help, and it might be, and really I think elected members are relying a lot on social media to get the messages out. So if we could get more of an indication of what those numbers look like and where the need is, because we are, I'm sure all of us are doing in our own roles, redirection to resources as best we can.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Dalton. I'll see if we can get any additional segmentation of those numbers so that you can support that. And in answer to the Mayor's question, we are working together with food banks who are being resourced through the normal resources, and tell us they are keeping, whilst it's difficult, they are keeping up with demand. So that is also good news.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it's important to stress that this new food distribution centre is designed for that bridging role. And, you know, we got a classic case that was referred to me yesterday of a woman that with, I think, 4 kids who said, hey, I've never had to ask for anything like this in my life, but, you know, we've lost our income as a household, and there is that delay before you get the Ministry of Social Development putting you on a particular benefit. Hopefully this will be a transitional role, because hopefully social development will keep up with the demand, but at the end of the wage subsidy we could see another spike. So this is a really important safeguard for those families that are suddenly and unexpectedly thrown out of work, not having an income, and wondering how the hell they're going to feed their kids. So 1,000 calls yesterday, that's perhaps a bit of an indicator of the scale of the problem that we'll be facing, and it really is important that we can fulfil that role. And I want to acknowledge the government that's we're doing the coordinating, we're doing the phone bank, they're providing the money for the food. We've got a supermarket chain that's providing the food, obviously. We're paying for that, a courier firms that are delivering, and another firm that's providing the place where we can run the distribution centre and the staff for that. So it's a really important initiative, and one that I'm really pleased that we're able to help on. Councillor Chris Darby.
No, nothing at this time, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Al Filipaina.
Nothing, just comments after Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question relates to whether we have sufficient, in a procurement sense, whether we have sufficient gear of masks and gloves and protective gear for all of the staff who are working on these essential services.
Okay, PPE. Ian, maybe you could answer that question.
Well, look, thank you, Councillor. There is sufficient masks and protection equipment essentially for the health system, and there's more coming into the country. For local government, there is an issue around the supply, but commencing next week, and I think it's some of the extras coming into the country next week will be available for those targeting those essential workers for local government, and a website will be established, and local government across New Zealand can access PPE equipment as they require it. So look, the situation is on the verge of getting a lot better.
So you'll keep us updated on that particular matter?
Yes, I will.
Thank you for that. Can you please convey to Gray Payne my sincere thanks? I think what you have done on the food program is amazing. And may I say, Ian, I'm so pleased you haven't yet retired to Wanaka. It's wonderful to know you in that role at this time.
He could be in employment for a long time if this goes on very, very much longer. No, but I think Gray and his team have done a fantastic job. 400 meals a day, 7 days a week, and you know, people are so enthusiastic to be able to be helping others that they know are in a position of particular need. And City Commissioner Chris Farrelly has asked me to pass on to Council his grateful thanks for the assistance that we're giving. They were in a really desperate situation, and we're filling a gap that is critical. Tau Henare.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My question is about understanding that iwi chairs have had an input into the Ministry of Health guidelines on tangihanga, and it's good to see that that's changed a wee bit. My concern, though, rests with urban Māori, Mātāwaka, obviously in Tāmaki, upwards of 100,000 Māori living in Tāmaki, and the transportation of their loved ones outside of Tāmaki to their haukainga, to their ancestral lands. Understanding the restrictions on who and how many can go. I even think that's a wee bit of a contentious issue. But as you say, Your Worship, there is a huge angst amongst our community about actually taking the deceased from Tāmaki through to the north or through to the south or east or west or wherever, and that needs some clarification. It needs you and our council to, I suppose, step into the breach and say, hey, we support Māori whānau repatriating their kin to their ancestral homes. It worries me that there is a feeling out there that, oh crikey, we've got to go and cremate them, we've got to go and put them on ice. I mean, I even had one person ring me asking about the use of an ice skating rink as a holding pen for a few months, and so the feeling is out there. I understand the laws and the rules behind it, but I just get the feeling that Māori are being asked to put on hold a quite a significant cultural aspect, and they were looking around and going, how do we do this? We still want to take our people home, which is the first thing they want to do. They realise the marae's even in the north and the south, and some of them are not working, some of them are closed, but they want to get their people home. So my question is, how are we as a council family going to look after Mātāwaka? I know that the iwi chairs, and I know the iwi they have their input, but it always seems to me that Mātāwaka, especially in something like this, misses out. Thank you.
Thank you, Tau. Tanya, is there any other comment you'd like to make on that?
Kia ora tau, and I tautoko your whakaaro around Mātāwaka at a time like this. Look, these are very live conversations that we're having. We have a pautikanga sitting under our structure in Auckland Emergency Management, and we're having a lot of kōrero around this topic, and not everyone's seeing eye to eye. We are working very closely with Mace's team as well, but I do think that there is an advocacy piece there that could be done, and I would welcome you to sit down with our pautikanga to have a kōrero about that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah, thanks. I think it is important to follow that up, and I think everybody around the table understands the pain that this situation is causing. I think probably more than almost anything else, to farewell your loved ones without being there to do it, and then the additional element of taking deceased persons back to their home burial ground is a real concern. Yet we all know, why the government has got to that point. I have raised it with Carmel Sepuloni, and I'll continue to see if there can be some flexibility in how that's being addressed. And I think if Tanya works through her channels as well, too. But we all understand that situation. It's an awful one. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Nothing, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Richard Hills.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I think Angela answered a lot of my asked a lot of my questions based on how we're connecting those agencies, people to agencies, because I think one call, a lot of people are brave enough to ring one number, but if they start having to be moved around and around and around, it can be quite stressful. And I think, yeah, once again, thank you to all the staff who are doing completely different jobs and being spread around and doing quite probably overwhelming work at the moment. My one question is again on staff, just another update of how we're supporting staff. If they are maybe older than 70 or immunocompromised or don't feel they can work during this time, are we forcing people into that? Are we still paying them if they can't? The other thing is around mental health and support. I've spoken to lots of our staff who are not feeling great or might have family situations that are extremely affected by this, but they're obviously still working, which is great. But how are we ensuring that we're we're not seeing, managers won't be seeing their staff members every day, they won't be aware necessarily exactly how people are feeling or the way they look? How can we ensure that we're not putting too much pressure on? How are we making sure that we're giving people the breaks or the Friday off or the I don't know, but I just have a concern how we are promoting mental health services and other things for the community, but also our staff at what is a completely intense time for them and their families.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll ask.
Look, thank you, Councillor. In terms of our vulnerable staff, so for example, people over 50, people with immune deficiencies in one form or another, pregnancies, that type of, we actually sent those people home prior to the commencement of Alert 4. So we were aware of those issues, and they've been working from home since that time. They're all receiving, well, if they're unable to work, if they're able to work, well and good. If they're unable to work from home, they're on discretionary leave. So there's no issues around payments, that type of thing. We are aware that the uptake of our employee assistance program around things such as depression and stress and so forth is rising, and we're certainly monitoring that closely. We have our managers are required to be in touch with their teams and to get a sort of a feel as to how things are going. It's not just work-related stress. It may be issues associated with other members of the family losing their jobs, or a more uncertainty or overcrowding, those types of issues. So we are aware that levels of stress are rising amongst our people, but we are certainly putting a lot of effort into mitigating that and ensuring that there are contacts, both formal contacts from their managers, but actually also informal contacts and a bit of fun in a way across the digital networks. So yes, we are aware of the issues, and while we're monitoring them and feel that they are reasonable at the moment, we are aware they're likely to rise over time.
Thank you very much. That's a good explanation. And the last follow-up question, just on the support for, 1,000 people calling yesterday is a bit of a punch in the stomach. I guess you kind of know, but it's pretty amazing. But what do we have enough resource to be supporting that level when that's day one? Are we getting resource from government as well at this time for that centre and the deliveries of that food? And if we can help in any, I know we've got a lot on ourselves, but if there is stuff we can do after hours or whatever that might be, just let us know.
Yeah, that's an important question that I've also put to Mace. We are getting the deliveries through. We are confident, but we don't know what the numbers might level out at, Richard. They might continue to go up, or as people get referred to mainstream social welfare agencies, they may go down. Mace, you might like to add to that.
Thanks, Councillor Hills. Yes, we do have sufficient resource. Tomorrow we will have significant delivery of supplies coming from the Hawke's Bay, as I mentioned. those are significant. They will be a significant delivery with over 5,000 boxes of emergency food parcels being able to be prepared. As I've said, we envisage that this will be a bridging approach, but that bridge may be quite a long one as more people become in need. So we'll keep an ongoing forecasting of what that need is. And in terms of funding, that funding is coming from the National Emergency Management Group or the Director to fund those supplies, and the collaboration with Countdown, or more correctly, Woolworths New Zealand company, has been very cooperative in being able to deliver those supplies.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question following my thanks to the executive team. What I would like to ask is that we have a number of small organisations who have assisted with food supplies and food baskets, food distribution in the past, and continue to do so, but their supplies are running low. Now, they are some of the groups that are unknown, and although acknowledged through the likes of local boards, churches and so forth, can I please ask that additional supplies are provided to those groups, such as, and I will outline some groups through the Kelston Hub, Glenavon Hub, Generation Ignite. For example, Generation Ignite had 15 cars they had to turn away. They don't normally have cars coming in. They work through the community centre. They are very low on supplies, and I do note we've said we're helping with the food distribution centre, the food banks, emergency food packages where staff are redeploying and are redeployed to assist with that. We've got the city mission, we've got the 0800. You said you took 3,000 calls and 1,000 of those were food related. I'm worried about my local area and those small groups who may not know where to go. I don't just want to be referred, please, to a number. I want someone to genuinely, in our team, assist me so I can help these people to get additional food for our local whānau here.
Thank you. I think I'll give that one back to Mace.
Thank you, Your Worship.
There's a degree of cynicism in that thank you, I thought.
No, of course not. I appreciate the problem, Councillor Mulholland. It is those local communities who are the backbone often of providing that welfare. I'll raise it with my head of welfare and see how we can reach out to those community groups, and I'd be very happy to get in contact with you after this to get some specifics for your local area in particular. But in terms of our emergency response, we'll probably continue doing what we're doing, but in terms of that broader welfare, we can reach into the out to those people as well with others such as Ministry of Social Development.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I really would like to take up that opportunity because these are legitimate local smaller groups who do help our local community. So I will take up that offer, Mr Mayor, and hopefully we can assist and aid those people, and I do support the work, of course, without doubt, that's going on. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, Kathy's raised the issues that I wanted to raise around the cemeteries. I mean, my understanding, therefore, is that this, the cemetery and the area where the burial is taking place is closed. But if there are no burials until it's taking place, and the cemetery, although being an operating cemetery, is still a park, and if there's an opportunity for people to still walk and obviously to place flowers, that would be good if we could just have some clarification as to that, so we can get some messaging out to the community, because I think at the moment everybody's just of the view that there is absolutely no way to enter the cemeteries. But if there is an opportunity and a process that we can balance out the need to ensure health of people whilst ensuring that they can actually enter those local cemeteries, that would be good.
Thank you. Ian, have you got anything you'd like to add to that? I presume the normal rules apply, which is keep within your local neighbourhood, and if you are going out to a park, 2 metres distance. But can we have clarification that it is possible to go to the cemetery if it's within your local, within those rules? Oh, Mace,
so perhaps Your Worship, in my day job I'll respond, but yes, it is possible for people to go into the cemetery. Staying local is that key message, Your Worship, and practicing social distancing. But we do recognise that people still want to visit their loved ones and those in memorialisation and place flowers on important anniversaries. The only real issue is when people drive to those cemeteries and we don't have them open at the moment due to being able to needing to control entry where we have burials, and not that we've yet had a burial for a COVID-19 case, but we are limiting the number of people who can come into the cemetery, into their bubbles for those burials. But otherwise, people still are able to visit visit cemeteries and place flowers and the like.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wonder if we could just get some bullet points for clarification that we can just post out to networks. I mean, obviously I don't want half Auckland driving to MMG or somewhere like that, but I mean there are some local cemeteries that people can access, and whilst I don't want to encourage people to be driving anywhere, if they can walk to and enter those locations, that would be good if we could just explain that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a very good, very helpful item for discussion. So thank you to you and the officers. My question is probably in the context of the, I have to say, the very good leadership that Auckland Council is showing, particularly from yourself, Mr. Mayor, and the heads of civil defence and the many other people involved. So my congratulations there. But my question has been, my primary question has been answered, but I did have a secondary one, which was around the wage subsidy. I understand that that is a 12-week subsidy, but I'm not sure what the start date was. I just wondered if the officers were in a position to indicate an end date for that wage subsidy. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Through you, Mr.
Yeah, Ian.
If we can't answer it here, I can get that information out to you.
Thanks, Greg. That's something obviously being done from Wellington. My understanding was that it will go the 12 weeks, but I don't know that they have made a hard and fast rule about whether that will continue beyond that time. I think it's burning about $1 billion $1 billion a week at the moment, at least. So while the government understands the need for that support, there will come a point where the debt to revenue ratio of government will put a constraint on whatever the program is that they're operating. At the moment, I think it's a critical bridge to keep people going. And if we're able to lift or reduce from level 4 to level 3 at the end of this period, that will really help. But we'll try and get some further clarification on that through Ian Maxwell, and he might send that out in the note to all of us, because I think it'll be relevant to all of us. Thank you very much for that question. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Your Worship, my question, got two short questions. First question, the staff member who self-isolated as a result of COVID-19, were they overseas on council business or private travel? First question.
Private travel.
Fantastic, thank you. Second question, on the cemeteries, and look, congratulations what you're doing around that. Of course, I've got a private cemetery in my region and in my ward, and I'm kind of keen to know that we are doing, have we got some liaison with the private providers so that our service levels are equal to, if not better than, private providers? I'm just trying to make sure that we are kind of not lagging behind, but certainly at least on, if not ahead of the game. Thank you.
Mace, that one comes to you, I think.
So yes, Councillor Simpson, we are working at a national level with other councils and Funeral Directors Association of New Zealand to ensure that we are benchmarking the services we're providing for cemeteries across the country and also advocating on specific issues back to Ministry of Health and others. But in the Auckland region for private cemeteries, we are also checking in with those cemeteries such as Pariwa, which will be in your ward.
That's it. So I think my point is I want to be not just equal to, but we need to just prove that our own cemeteries are definitely, you're checking in. I just want the answer to be, yes, we are.
Yes, we are, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Yes,
Sharon?
Just clarification just on the cemeteries once again. I'm just a little bit concerned that we could be opening up a bit of a Pandora's box by sending out messages that people can go and visit their departed and put flowers on gravesites, because I thought with the whole object of this isolationists and the four-week lockdown, which sounds like it could be a little bit longer, is that we're trying to contain and keep everything local and keep it in the neighbourhood. And yes, if there's a gravesite and it's in your neighbourhood and it's in walking distance, that's probably okay. But I just wonder whether we're actually getting advice from even the National Crisis Management Centre, just making sure that we're all doing the same thing, because I think we need to make sure we have the same message, and that message has to be right through the country. And if we start having isolated decisions here and there, that's just one of the questions that I wanted to ask. And just one other, we're talking about the 57 public toilets that have been open for essential drivers. That's really, really good. Just wanting to make sure and find out these public toilets, do they have notices saying that they're only for essential drivers? How often are they being cleaned? That sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on the former, look, you're very strong on this, and consistency is really important. The basic rules are to stop, to discourage people, actually to stop people from going out from their homes and places where large numbers of people will gather, or leaving their local neighbourhoods. And I think the rules that will apply around visiting cemeteries are that if you're hopping in your car to drive any distance to it, that's out. And if there are gatherings of people, that's out. You can't allow people to visit deceased relatives that may have died some time ago while stopping people from attending a funeral of somebody who's recently died. So the general rules will apply in visiting cemeteries as to apply to anything else. You can no more hop in the car and drive to a cemetery than you can do the same to go to a beach. And the government has clarified and tightened those rules, and the reason is to stop the transmission of the disease, which is the fundamental underlying driving point of what we're doing. On the toilets, I'll just ask, who am I going to ask? Is it Mace or Ian? There's real competition between the two of them to answer this question.
It's not quite competition, but no, look, so notices are up and they are cleaned, but the usage is not monitored, so they're acting as public toilets as such, but there are notices saying what they're intended to be used for, but we're not actually able to monitor that.
Thank you. IMSB Chair, David Taipari.
Oh, kia ora, Your Worship. First and foremost, I just want to acknowledge yourself and the Council as a whole in your resolution to include the board in this committee, because it is unique and there are matters outside of the committee of whole, but our inclusion, I think, is very important, and I think truly appreciated by that decision to include us. I do have more than one question, and I work on the basis that my ideal world would be that 9 board members sitting with the councillors, but that's not going to happen. So I might take the leave to ask more than one question on behalf of the board in that vein. And I have a couple of questions really po whakarai and one general question, and that is, in terms of po whakarai, I guess my number one thing from hearing that report is, what is the actual demand from the Māori people in relationship to that unit, and how are we monitoring the effectiveness of that in terms of ensuring that we are reaching the people and being, quite precise that we are getting out to them. And my next question is around the budgeting for all of this, and I note that Māori outcomes will suffer in terms of underspend because projects will be on hold, I would have thought, potentially. And is there going to be a reprioritisation of Te Toa Takatini budget to give effect to the resources that may be required for Māori? And my third question around po whakarai is, how has the board been involved, the Independent Māori Statutory Board been involved, because it wasn't listed at all in that grouping. And my question is, under the legislation that Council has to seek direction and support and around plans and policies and the like for Council, how will the board via its Secretariat be involved? Because I listened earlier when member Henare asked the question and the response was, I'll come and see you. And my concern is, from a board perspective, that the board as a whole should be engaged via the Secretariat rather than individuals being picked off just because they sit on a committee. So those are the three questions I have for po whakarai. The one general question is this, and Councillor Stewart said it just a minute ago, that there's a potential that this lockdown will go longer. And my biggest concern is that part of the reasoning behind that is people aren't staying home. And I understand from my other roles that the police are looking for stronger authority, which may come shortly, in enforcing lockdown. And so my question, general question to all of you is, what is Council's position in enforcing lockdown? And I don't want to sound selfish, but I've been in isolation basically since January the 20th, and I've got quite used to it, as I've said before. But we really need an end sight. And if people are just going out willy-nilly, this is just going to go on forever. And I have a big concern about that. So those are my questions, Your Worship.
Well, I'm going to leave the po whakarai questions to Tanya to answer. On the financial side, excuse me, we are going to have to look at everything, but we've made no decision. So I don't think we can give you an answer on that question yet. Simply that we know that we will be heavily down in terms of our revenue, and the longer this goes on, the greater the revenue drop will be. And we are still in a position where our debt to revenue ratio matters, and we don't have that facility that central government has to lift their borrowing from 19% of GDP to what might be 40%. The second question on how long does this go on, I think, David, we all have that question, and we don't know the answer to it yet, and the answer is likely to be if it has to be extended, because there is still a real risk of a rise in transmission that would overwhelm our health system, it probably will be extended. If we all follow the rules, then the risk of that is limited. And do we have the power to enforce that? No. We do have a line that you can ring, the 105 line or the 105 email to the police, and the police are the enforcers. And I think you'll find that the police will become increasingly less tolerant of people blatantly breaching the rules. For each individual that does that, they are putting the lives of others at risk. So those are the broad answers, but if I can come back to the po whakarai and ask Tanya to comment on that, please.
Kia ora. The first question, Member Taipari, what is the demand? We don't know at this stage, but the sense out in the community is that it's going to be large. That is why we have front-footed by at least trying to coordinate some of the activity going on across agencies. We already know that people hold really great intel. Part of the structure is a PO around intel, and we've got making sure that we're all using the same information so that we have a really good evidence-based view of what's going on, and that information is getting fed in from Māori communities, TPK and others, as well as iwi. In terms of your second question around Māori outcomes budget, agree. That was the kōrero that the Māori Outcomes Steering Group had yesterday. So we're just working through some recommendations which will be going to the chief executives of the group, including the IMSB. In terms of board involvement to date with Pou Whakarai, we have been going for a week trying to set up the structure. We have a Pou tangata which will not be exclusive, it will be inclusive, and the board is more than welcome, or the members of the Secretariat, to provide advice and intel through that Pou tangata. And your fourth question around not going directly to specific board members, just to clarify that I was inviting member Henare to come and talk to the Pou tikanga, which again is not exclusive, it's inclusive, and we've got a variety of staff who have expertise when it comes to tikanga, but not only that, kaumātua and others from the communities who are coming together from time to time to kōrero about matters of tikanga and how we might feed that up through the other agencies.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Well, can I just finish?
Well, look, I'd like you to make it quick, please, David, because you know, time is going on.
And simply, I wasn't seeking for council to have the enforcement power. I wanted to understand what council's position was on that, because it will be the police and or civil defence that empowers that. And the second matter is, both myself and member Henare are here as board members, not members of the public individually, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Wayne Walker. I can't hear you, Wayne, if you've got your microphone on.
Can you hear me now, Phil?
Yeah, I can hear you now. That's great. So one question and one sub, please.
Sure. All right. I guess broadly, I'm directly involved with a number of things, including the storage and distribution of food to people in need. Also associated with facilities to 3D print masks, for example, for people on the front line, and a number of other things. And what I'm finding is a difficulty locating resources. So, for example, immediately there are a number of pallets of food that I need to source from the airport to bring to Whangaprawa, so it's a matter of locating logistical requirements. And my difficulty is finding the people across council that are able to assist in enabling things. So that's a rather broad question.
So who on council can be in contact with you to assist with that food distribution in that area?
And things generally where.
Yep. Well, let's focus on your specific question, Mace. In terms of groups that may be out in the community that are helping with food distribution, who do they get in touch with in order to ensure that they have the food to distribute? And is there clear criteria around that?
Thank you, Your Worship. So, and Councillor Walker. So, in terms of the food that's being delivered for the emergency packages, that's being delivered by New Zealand couriers, so there's no need for assistance. That's being done, but in terms of other food, through the normal social services, so your normal community contacts that you will have in your community.
Okay. Somebody's got
I just have a supplementary question.
Yeah, one supplementary. Thank you.
So in civil defence, we used to have contact lists of various resources in the community that were available at a time like this. I just don't know whether any of those contact lists or the like are available anymore.
Mace, any comment in response to that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. We can get those local, as mentioned before, those local civil defence groups, we can get those contacts out to you. No problem.
And just further to that,
sorry, look, I just asked you to restrict it to one, thanks, because I've made that rule for everyone. Councillor John Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Could we just a request? Could we, if there's been an update to the 57 toilets, if that's an increase, could we just please have a list of those toilets, perhaps by region? Because in addition to the essential workers, there are these groups of homeless people who rely on these toilets basically to, you know, to exist. So just to get a better handle on what's the closest one to any given settlement. My question, however, just goes to, there's a lot of people out cycling and walking. There's a program on 7 Sharp last night, I think it was Half Moon Bay, of people walking around. What I've found in recent times is a couple of walkways have been shut up in my area that don't seem to pose any, you know, direct threat. They're not, you know, they're in kind of relatively isolated locations. Could we, that sort of activity is really important for people now, and I know there's a balance here, but is there any particular policy that's just been rolled out in the last few days that has seen some of these additional walkways getting shut that, you know, maybe, you know, at a squeeze they might not quite be 2 metres, but generally speaking there's only one person going up and down? Is there any information there by way of update?
Just before I get Mace to answer that, if you've got your microphone still on, can you turn it off if you're not talking, please? Because we're getting a lot of extraneous noise, which I suspect comes from mics still on and being brushed. Mace, do you have an answer to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll ask, I'll get Claudia Weiss to go back together with Rod Sheridan, Councillor, just so that I'm not sure of the circumstances of why those walkways would have been closed.
Kia ora koutou, Mace and councillors. This is Claudia Weiss on the line. If you can hear me, I can probably provide a quick update now, if that helps.
That'll be helpful. Thanks, Claudia.
Kia ora, Mayor. Thank you very much for your time today. Some of the smaller walkways have been closed. We've been watching closely the central government guidelines regarding walkways and the ability to maintain social distancing. And the smaller walkways, many of those do not allow that. So if there are other people who pass along those walkways, the single file way that those walkways are structured will not allow safe distancing. And that has been the main reason why those walkways are closed at this stage.
Thank you, and I presume we can get a list of those, the toilets that are open. I've seen a list published somewhere.
Yes, we have a list. Yes, we have a list, and I will follow up with our communications team to see if we can make that more accessible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Young, Paul Young.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor. As I got a request from the community recently, my question is, do we accept the PPE equipment donation either from Auckland local or overseas? And how to manage it to protect our essential workers in Auckland Council? Thank you.
I think we'll do that nationally. They're coordinating nationally both the provision of PPE equipment that can be manufactured here and that's being imported. But Ian might be able to throw some light on that. Ian, any comment?
Yes, there's we've actually had offers of a range of gifts, not just PPE, but other support as well. And it is being managed centrally. And so if there is an opportunity there, I can get in touch with the councillor and put those two organisations in touch so that we can manage it in an appropriate way.
Thank you very much. Any supplementary, Paul?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. Look, we'll run through comments now, but I'm conscious of the time, and we've spent a long time on questions. So please, for those councillors wanting to comment, can you keep your comments relatively concise? We've got another item still to deal with under the extraordinary item. So we'll work backwards again. If you don't need to comment, we'll be very grateful for that. Councillor Young?
No comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Watson?
No comment.
Thank you. Councillor Walker? I don't know whether you've got your mic on, Wayne, again. I'll just keep going and come back to me if you'd like to make a comment. IMSB Chair Taipri?
No further comment, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart?
No comment.
Councillor Sayers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No comment.
Councillor Newman?
No comment.
Councillor Mulholland?
No comment.
Councillor Hills?
Just thank you, and it's a massive undertaking, and thanks to all the staff.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson? He who hesitates is lost. I'll keep moving. Come back to me if you...
No problem. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Henare?
No comment, Your Worship.
Councillor Fletcher?
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I think it's been a helpful session, but I have every confidence that the officers that are directing this work understand the sweet spot between human rights and human survival. So I'm really encouraging them to make the calls that they need to make.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Filipaina?
I'll save everything for our workshop or weekly update after this, Your Worship.
Councillor Darby?
Yeah, just briefly, look, I understand that this here is an initial report on the response to the health pandemic going forward, and it's probably something for a discussion in our workshop, is that we get stuck into probably looking at the work streams that come out of this, looking at the economic pandemic that's coming out of this COVID situation. There's probably my question really of the Chief Executive is that we need to develop a work stream, keeping in mind that our committee work streams are in large fallen away because they don't have much relevance at the moment. But looking at a work stream that just goes beyond the health response to COVID, because this is a landscape that's dramatically changed, and I think we need to get our heads around that sooner and not later.
Absolutely endorse that comment, Councillor. The tidal wave of the economic impact of this is still coming. Council officers are working quite hard on it with myself and the Chair of the Committee, Desley Simpson. We may have something to report next week or the following week to this emergency committee, but we're working within the much larger context that you rightly point to. We are looking, according to Treasury, at unemployment that could be anywhere between 5 and 10 or 11% plus, and it's more likely to be at the high rather than the low end. So that will be a concern to all of us.
You're breaking up.
Okay, I'm sorry. That will be a concern to all of us, and we will need to get that balance right between cutting our cloth to meet our budget and doing what we can to act as a stimulus to help the economic recovery. But I think if we leave that conversation to next week, Councillor Darby, it's an important point. Councillor Dalton.
No comment, thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to go back to your earlier comments about our water supply, because we're consumed with COVID-19 at the moment, and you said we had a 53% jam fill. It's actually 52%, and so I think it's just to be in our minds that we're not ready to go to water restrictions yet. I've spoken with the Chair of Watercare about the drought may not break till May, June, so we just have to have this in the back of our minds that we may have to deal with something else as well alongside this, and I think that's quite critical, but I'm sure that's something we will have to deal with. But just to be mindful, it isn't over yet, our water shortage.
No, that's absolutely
Not
correct.
very happy news, but yeah, it is an issue. But we have had a big reduction in use, but we need to keep that up. And it's hard with all the messages. We've got all the pandemic messages, but somehow, maybe as elected members, there's the occasional reminder, and it's not about not washing hands, because that's only about 20 megalitres. It's more about stopping washing your house, stopping watering your garden, and stopping washing your car, those sorts of things which are really water intensive.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. Thank you, Councillor. I think our rainfall has been about a third for the first quarter of this year that it normally is. And while we've dropped our consumption by 100 million litres a day from the peak, once we get down below the 47 mark, we may need to step up, and we'll take advice from Watercare on that. We may need to step up whether we move from voluntary compliance with not washing your car in your house to some stricter measures, but we'll have a better take on that, I think, in about a fortnight. Can I come back to Councillor Simpson? I might have missed out.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
My apologies, Councillor. It wasn't deliberate.
Oh, no, I know that. Look, just a quick comment. Mace, could you contact me offline? I've got a couple of PPE providers who've got stock locally. So that was my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and my apologies. Councillor Coombe. Not getting any reply from...
Yes, thank you. I am here.
Yep, thank you. Any comment?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment in terms of supporting that we are making public all of the activities that Council is putting in place to support the community through the crisis. And I have made it very public about just being how impressed I am and proud just in terms of that response and how the Council team have worked around the clock to put in place the response. And it's not just the continuation of the essential services, but this short report highlights how it's responding, stepping up to support vulnerable communities and respond to different community needs. So I think that's really do support that being put out there. Just from the comments from councillors, do appreciate there's lots of things still to work through and local issues and things that I do appreciate the quick response I'm getting to things that I'm raising. So I did just want to acknowledge that, and in terms of supporting that we are making it public what the activities are underway. And I think it also helps that we do now have our Auckland website has been transformed in a way that means all of the information is there. And I think we're getting better at putting stuff up very quickly and having clear communication so that we don't cause concern, additional concern by just not being clear about what support is there and what we are asking of the community at the same time. So thank you. I just wanted to make those few comments.
Thank you, Councillor. Much appreciated. Councillor Collins.
No comment from me, thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Again, congratulations to the staff. It's good work, but the challenge is still before us and will only get greater as we go through the next 4 to 8, 12 weeks and beyond. Speaking to the business community leaders yesterday, they are fielding thousands of calls from businesses who are facing decimation. And we are looking at a tidal wave of issues coming towards us, so we need to be prepared. And our budgets are only limited. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Once we've dealt with the health crisis, that's not the end of it. That's a good point. It will have severe economic implications, and that will be quite new to our generation, maybe not to our parents and grandparents. Councillor Casey.
No comment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley.
The staff for everything they're doing, in particular Ian, Stephen, Kate and Natalie, in regards to housing our homeless and rough sleepers during the lockdown. Really appreciate their fast response and their efforts there. And also in terms of food, doing the food parcels. But just want to reiterate that the food parcels, we need to be very open with the criteria there and the eligibility, because the ones that regularly access welfare services, they've got some, they're being catered to through Kāinga Ora, in my area through Tamaki Regeneration Company, but those that are working who are not in, state houses, they are not being catered to in that regard. So if they're on subsidies, I think they are coming across some barriers in accessing food parcels through ringing our helpline. So I want to make sure that we're very open with that criteria. And also that the issues that I see coming through now are in regards to mental health and well-being for people. People are very anxious and worried, and what role can we play there as council? And also in terms of economic recovery. So I have a lot of local businesses closing down and wanting to see AT step up in terms of local economic development recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Look, we're noting the activities that have been undertaken by the Council to support the wider community in response to COVID-19. We also need to now look at the second item on the agenda, and that is to look at a summary of infrastructure criteria that have been announced by the government. You may be aware that this arose first from the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson, who said we'll be looking at some projects in construction that will get the construction sector back to work quite quickly and have a pipeline of activities to give confidence to that area, will provide a stimulus for the economy, will be a job creator. And I think 2 days ago we had a press statement from Phil Twyford and Shane Jones, and yesterday we actually got the specific criteria of what they were looking for from local councils and also from the private sector. They also gave us a timeline. The good news is that, as I said before when I was asked, I think by staff, do you have any projects that you could help the government with? Yes, we're here from local government and we're ready to help. The criteria, however, is somewhat narrower and the timeline is steeper than what we may have anticipated. So it's important to bring to you today a report from our council officers as to what we're looking for. The minister, and I rang the minister straight after the announcement, said, look, they'll be looking short term, intermediate term and long term, but for the purposes of this exercise, we're looking at the short term. And it basically, we have to have it's a 14 questionnaire on each project back to the government by the 14th, which is less than a fortnight away. I know that both ward councillors and local boards will want to have an impact into this area, to have an input into it and an impact. And what we'll be doing from the discussion I've had with officers, we'll need to get that very, very quickly. Perhaps we'll send out to you the questions that they need answered on any particular area where we might be seeking infrastructure investment. So the criteria we're looking at are the government criteria, the government requirements of that it'll be job creating, that it'll have a multiplier effect, that it will free up private investment. And I think from our perspective, we'll be looking at a range of projects. We won't be successful on all of them, but let's put up as many as our officers have time to complete, and that will be the critical question. But we'll be looking at regional equity. We'll look at projects meeting wider objectives, and we'll be looking at projects that the staff can do the required work on, which is kind of what needs to be done. Is it ready? Can it get off the ground within 6 months? And can we indicate what the risks are, where we are on the consenting process, etc. So it may well be cases where we've already applied for consent, but because of the current economic framework, we're now worried about whether our revenue it will be there to put in our share of the cost of those infrastructure projects. So what I want, officers have been working for quite a while on this. I've got, I've got Stephen Town as our CEO that may wish to comment on this, Barry Potter and Megan Tyler and John Dunshea, I think, are the key officers that have been working on it. Have I covered everybody there, Stephen? And I'm not quite sure. I think it's Barry that will lead on this. So I'll get Barry to give an outline, and then we'll go through the process of questions and comments. But the emphasis is we've got a very short time frame, quite specific criteria. What projects have we got that we can pull together and answer the questions that the government wants within less than 2 weeks? That's really tight. Barry, if I can invite you to address the challenge ahead of us, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me there?
I can hear loud and clear. I think members can hear okay.
Okay, Your Worship. So just 3 things I'll cover briefly, and then we can take a background to it. We'll talk about a little bit more about the criteria, and then just the process we have to work to from here. So background of this is, well, yesterday officers received the detailed information from Crown Infrastructure Partners. So we've only just had this very recently. Crown Infrastructure Partners, they're assisting the Industry Reference Group, which is chaired by Mark Binns, to advise the government and ministers on issues affecting the construction industry as a result of COVID-19. The ministers would like to understand the availability of shovel-ready projects. The information will be used to form any potential response required to provide certainty on a pipeline to be commenced or recommenced to the construction industry once the response level has got to a point that is suitable for work to start. Criteria have been established, and I'll spend a little bit of time, and those criteria will be what the group uses to assess which projects might go forward. The key focus is on projects that are already in construction but have stopped, or projects that are close to being ready for construction, and only those projects that meet those criteria will be forwarded to the ministers by that group. The work that staff have been doing, and we've just been working on this for a while, staff have been using the work they've already been doing in the infrastructure space over recent years as a basis for proposals that might go forward. Those things we've been working on, of course, include the Auckland Transport Alignment Program, a Crown Council Joint Work Program, Housing Program, Kāhui Work Program, Structure Planning and Spatial Priorities, City Centre Developments, Panuku Work Program, Asset Management Plans for Stormwater, Water, Wastewater, Community Facilities and Community Services, and Auckland Transport's Work Program. So we've only just begun this work. We don't have any proposed lists for councillors and members to comment on at this stage. You'll understand it's just been announced and the timeframes are incredibly tight. However, we would appreciate any comments or thoughts that you would have on what final projects could be included, and we will need that feedback by Monday morning at 9 o'clock, the 6th of April. We have to have our response into Crown Infrastructure Partners by 14th of April, and our intention is to come back to the Emergency Committee on next Thursday so that we can get some guidance from you about these projects. So the criteria, there are 4 criteria that they will be assessed against. Criteria 1 is the extent to which the project is construction ready now or will be ready realistically within 6 to 12 months. So that construction readiness is really important. Criteria 2, the project is of an infrastructure nature. That's either horizontal or vertical, so it can be civil or buildings. And the project is public or brings public or regional benefit. Criteria 3 is around the size of the project or program of works. So it's important to understand that that size has to have material employment benefits
and they have a threshold of $10 million above. And criteria 4 is an assessment of the overall benefits and the risks of the project. And that includes an assessment of what the COVID-19 risk might be to that project. As you mentioned, Your Worship, there is a very detailed form that is for each project and will take some time to work. So important things to keep in mind in this process, given the projects have to be shovel ready, the opportunity to go out and create new projects or to put forward projects that are not already well progressed in their planning. So from this group or to this group, an email will come out today to you giving a summary of what's required, and just to reinforce that message that we'll need a response back from you on projects by 9 a.m. on Monday and the next governing body meeting.
Thank you very much, Barry. Are there any other officers that want to report on this, or have you've covered it off for everybody, Barry?
I think we've covered it off.
Okay, that's great. So that gives you a clear idea of the time frame. I'm sorry, councillors, I'd hope we'd have longer than that, but by Monday morning we'd need any ideas, and you've got probably, I think, Barry, we might think of putting out the questions that have to be answered to councillors, so they can have a bit of a crack at that locally to see whether we have the answers and whether we meet the criteria. That would help councillors. You've got an idea of the criteria that's been spelt out. What we need to do is to indicate that we are able to assist the government in this, and we can get things off the ground really quickly. There are wider projects that I thought might have been eligible, but the focus for this immediate package is not even the intermediate or long term, it's the short term. So that has narrowed the range of things that we may usefully be able to have put forward, but we'll be looking presumably to Auckland Transport, to Watercare, to Healthy Waters, to Panuku and anybody else that can come up with ideas. But if you as ward councillors, and hopefully we'll get these out to our local board chairs as well, have ideas that we think we can put together in that time frame that would meet those criteria, put them forward. The big challenge for our team will be they can't process 100 ideas. They can only process probably, maybe a dozen ideas. Too many. I'm getting the shake of the head there. Maybe half a dozen ideas overall. So look, we'll run through it by way of questions again, and I'll start at the top of the list. Questions, and please keep them to one question. Councillor Bartley.
No question from me, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Casey. I can't hear anything there. Councillor Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Barry. Interesting initiative, tight timeframes. What's the ability that we're going to have, say, to bundle facilities programs up, so things like upgrades or repaints or refurbishments of community facilities, sports fields, parks, etc., into one package that fits the criteria?
Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, yes, we have the opportunity there. There is the ability to put together a program of works. They are looking for that threshold of $10 million.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
No questions from me, thanks, Mayor. Just look forward to receiving the outline that Barry covered off in his report, just to start getting our heads around it, because we've had already initial discussions with a couple of local boards.
Great, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll be looking at whatever list can be put together by this time next week at the emergency meeting, so that's why the time frame is as tight as it is. Councillor Coombe. Councillor Cooper. Oh, Councillor Coombe, sorry.
Yes, I am here. Thank you. I do just look forward to getting the memo as well, and of course wanting to look at our list through a climate positive lens, and I hope that even though that government hasn't put that in their criteria, that we will absolutely set a higher bar for our own criteria of what we put forward. But I look forward to just being able to contribute once by Monday. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's important that the projects we put forward meet our own economic, social and environmental criteria as well as the government's. If we can do those things, that obviously improves the chances of success. So we'll do some hard thinking on that. Councillor Cooper?
All right, Councillor Henderson and I are already onto this, so you'll have our thoughts next week on the deadline. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm expecting some proposals on the northwestern motorway and maybe the shoulder project that hopefully could come into that criteria. Councillor Dalton.
No questions.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Yes, thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Barry. Look, I noticed quite telling comments in the Bins letter that maybe others haven't seen. It's a great line. No half-baked and no bridges to nowhere projects. So that goes back to what Councillor Coombe has just raised, actually. If we don't put a climate lens through this, it is a half-baked bridge to nowhere project. So question to you, Barry, even though we've got government's criteria, can we overlay that with our criteria? Because I think we need to look at leveraging multiple benefits here. So Councillor Coombe has raised one. If we look at the transport space, we need to look at mode shift, better transport choices. We need to look at road safety. We need to look at how it fits for the future. And the future has just dramatically changed. So a lot of projects may not be relevant anymore to the future, which we're only just finding out about. So my question to you, Barry, is when you send your memo out, can you identify what the government criteria is, but also very carefully outline what the Auckland Council criteria would be?
Yes, we can do that. We can put over whatever criteria we might want to include over it. We will need to be aware of the time frame that we have to establish what those criteria are, but we can give some guidance on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. What I should note is that in addition to the usual projects that we think of in regard to infrastructure of transport and water and environment, there'll be some other projects that will be coming forward affecting the Auckland region, I imagine, that might be in the area of health and education. Now, we won't be making recommendations or putting forward projects in those areas, but those are areas that are also legitimate areas to consider in terms of infrastructure for our city. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just to comment, just a little one around what you've just said. I think with the projects moving forward, there may be some that has an impact on the health and everything else of our community, so they should be considered as well. Barry, can you assure me that the directors who are looking after, for example, the PACE committee, they will be advised or consulted in regards to this?
Do you want to respond, Megan?
Kia ora, thank you, Alf. It's Megan here. Look, as you know, this is really quick. So so what we'll do is we'll put an email out to all elected members today, asking for feedback. Next week, we will need to work out how we frame those up and then put them into the system for the committee. So could I...
Okay, I'm not sure whether we lost volume during the last part of that, but did you hear the answer, Alf?
Yeah, it was just a little part around, hopefully Megan saying equity is going to be one of the key criteria for us, along with what others have said, Your Worship.
Yeah, I think equity is important,
Absolutely.
and regional equity, both of those things. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to add my weight to the comments made by Councillor Cashmore that you can bundle up some of those sports fields upgrades and so forth in hopefully a package. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Hanare?
No questions, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and might I say, very perceptive call about the Northwest. I think we might have a few ideas.
I think I can anticipate those.
I do have another question, actually. So when we're talking about projects, just to be clear, are we talking about proposing one specific project per thing, or can it apply to a range of projects? For example, greenways plans, those kind of things?
The focus is very clearly on infrastructure and putting forward projects. Their prime driver here is how to get a workforce back onto tools and working quickly. So we can bundle up projects with whatever range we want. At this stage, Crown's overlying goal here is to get infrastructure projects up and running because of the people they employ.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you. First, just a comment. I'm a bit concerned about the panel. I don't know if we can give feedback on that. That's basically for people from a certain demographic, no women, no Māori, no Pacific. I have a concern that the decisions about what projects are going to be chosen come from one sector of society, so just keep that in mind. How do we give feedback to ensure that they're looking broadly for the future of all our communities, but they're, in the end, the final decision is going to be made by this panel, which is not even, as far as I can see by the names, slightly diverse. So that's just a concern that maybe we should be putting forward. The other thing, following up others around climate change and future-proofing, how intensely are we putting a look at that? The other things are how, the bundling is good, but also what are other things that we could be doing, like choosing things that are wrong. So like Councillor Darby said, we may not have immigration for 2 years. We are not going to have housing growth. We are probably not going to have greenfield growth for a long time, the overseas investment, things like this. How can we ensure that these projects are doing the best for us right now, but also into the future? How broadly are we really thinking? And the other thing around shovel ready, we're going to need to engage as many jobs, including those designers, architects, all that sort of thing. Does shovel ready mean that we have a complete design and it's ready to go, or does that mean that we could engage some creatives and designers and all that in the next 6 months to draw up, design, plan things, which would also, that's a whole lot of highly paid, good creative jobs as well. And the creative sector is being smashed at the moment. So I just want to make sure that we're not going shovel ready means that it needs to, because not everything is going to start bang on the 6 months. That just is not how the line works. So those are a lot of questions, but I'm just quite confused and concerned that we're going to rush to bad decisions.
Yeah, shovel ready I take to mean that the construction, because this is around a construction package, but design and engineering work is part of that, but I take it to mean that you could actually start to begin construction within 6 months. That's what they've largely used, but somewhere else they've got 6 to 12 months. So I think there's a little bit of flexibility around it. Take on board that the world is going to look different, the comments that yourself and Councillor Darby have made. But we shouldn't imagine that because there might not be any the level of growth we had before, that we still don't have a shortfall in our housing stock, which has been estimated around about 30 or 40,000. So I wouldn't be going out to say, look, immigration slowed right down, therefore we don't need any housing. I think we need to keep that section of the construction industry.
I said greenfield housing, not necessarily all housing.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, we're looking both ways on that one. Anyway, Councillor Mulholland.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity. My question
is for Barry Potter. Barry, is there an opportunity with this to have a discussion with yourself and Panuku around a combined public and private housing development, one that also relates to utilising a TOD, so in terms of advocacy for those types of projects, and I'm also interested in equity, of course, but I do support the projects in principle, except for a couple that have been raised. I'm especially supportive of stormwater and water management, but I'm interested in the answer on that public-private housing, where it includes a council environment, a council space. Kia ora.
Yes, Councillor Mulholland, it can be that. The thing we need to be mindful of here is that these are projects looking to be at least well developed in their thinking and planning, and they're pretty much ready to go.
Kia ora, thank you. Yes, I am aware of that, and I'm also aware of the, I've got 3 pages of notes that I've taken since you've been talking on the subject matter. May I have the opportunity to speak with you with regards to a couple of ideas of projects that I believe are going to go into consenting very soon in the area, which would support that housing and public space need? Thank you.
Definitely, yes.
Yep, we'll get you two to do that offline. Councillor Newman.
Oh, yep. You there?
Yep, we can hear you, Daniel.
Yeah. Look, a comment and then a question from me. I think the key thing here is to push the projects that are going to keep New Zealanders in paid employment. I mean, you know, we're all getting paid our 6-figure salaries. So for me, the objective is the transport infrastructure projects, the other enabling works that enable New Zealanders to be paid. And Councillor Dalton and I are coming up with our list, and I think that the bundling option is a good one. Barry, and I've asked my CSA this morning, but can we can you really encourage Auckland Transport and Watercare and Healthy Waters to make available information about their forward renewals program? And I know that their renewals program has been designed, I guess, to sort of like cut their cloth with the budget that they're going to get, or that they assume they're going to get. But I'd actually like to see what that renewals program would look like if it was significantly supersized, if we were able to bring forward a lot of those renewals projects that don't need to be consented, don't need to be business case, but actually ready to go if we had the funding to do that work. And but can you really lean on them to try, and I know that they're all working very hard, but if we can just get as much information circulated as soon as possible, because, you know, we've got some millions of dollars worth of renewals projects that could sit alongside some really good new infrastructure projects that will need to get brought through the RLTP, for example. So can you see what you can do with the infrastructure providers in the CCO space to ensure that we can get some information circulated as soon as possible to inform this discussion?
Yes, I'll after this and see what we can get out there, Councillor Newman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two questions. I'll mention them both now. Do the contractors have any ability to submit into this process directly, or does it kind of get sieved through us? And the second question is, at what will be the response level when the construction industry can carry out these projects? Will it be down to a level, 2, 3, or 1? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed the second question here. The answer to the first one is my understanding is yes, they can do that. Just repeat the second question.
Sure, Barry. What will be the response? What will the response level need to be at for the construction industry to actually start to carry out these projects? I.e., does it have to drop to a level 2 or 3 or 1? Because it could be a rate determining step. That was all. Do we know? Or?
No, in terms of the size of the construction companies this is aimed at, that's unclear, and I think it's just identifying projects that can get underway as soon as possible. The feedback I've had from the construction sector is that unless they can get work going pretty quickly, or unless things can change, there's quite serious consequences for the infrastructure construction sector.
I think it's Megan here, just to add to that as well. That will ultimately be a government decision about at what level things can start again.
Yeah, I think what we've got to remember is the criteria that will apply here is not our criteria, but their criteria, and that's the criteria that we most need to fit in, and we need to make sure we have a sufficient number of projects, that it's not a case of saying, well, we gave you everything you wanted, you didn't ask for any more, and therefore, you might not be getting your share of the cake. Our goal should be to get our share of the cake for Auckland, third of the country's population, 38% of the GDP. But we need to make sure that what we are providing certainly is not half-baked, certainly not a bridge to nowhere. I've got an idea where that bridge comment came from, but that are real projects that will make a real difference, leave a legacy for the city, and will achieve those objectives quite quickly. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, that's quite a good comment for me to ask my question, because I can't understand why our first priority isn't to bring forward our work programs. And if in the infrastructure space, and if the criteria is 10 million and some of that work program is projects less than that, why we aren't automatically, before we come in with some extra stuff, bundling those up into packages so they do exceed the sort of $10 million threshold. For me, that would be the absolute number one. I don't understand why we're not doing that work first. Megan?
I think take that on board, and that's something we'll be looking at when we pull the programs together over the next few days.
You see my point, though. We can come up with a whole lot of things, but actually we've already got a work program. We've already got a series of things that we want to achieve, and some of which we've been able to fund and some of which we haven't. We should prioritise those first before we dream up a whole lot of new stuff. That's just where I was coming from. My second question is around trying to get the one dig policy. What are we doing about, because, we've got a huge amount of water care, healthy waters, we've got a water quality targeted rates, that's a lot of below the ground stuff. We're well behind that. Surely that should be a prioritisation. And then how are we working with things like Vector and power companies to try and get these big projects one dig, so people don't, if we are going to put some serious investment, that we're not, doing something, closing it all down only for the power companies to come back 5 minutes later and do their thing.
So that'd certainly be part of the process, and projects that we're looking at the moment include speeding up things like water sewer separation projects water care have in place. The dig once, I think we've made good the last couple of years, but that's certainly part of how we do these things all, and that of course scales up the project to a larger size.
So, Your Worship, are we able to get that forward work program sort of thing first, or do you still want us to put through our own projects?
Well, officials, I think, very clearly are going to be looking at, if we're looking at things that are already consented, but we might not have the funding for. I think that's how Barry started off his presentation. I think one of the examples I used in my comment the other day for Councillor Sayers was the Matakana Link program, where everything's ready to go, but we're not quite sure because of the impact on council revenue whether we can meet our share of the bargain because of COVID-19. So those sort of projects, I think, are certainly among the projects we may be looking at. And from my discussions with Shane Ellison, that's certainly what he's looking at. And we're not starting from scratch on this. So projects that we did have that were further back in ATAP, for example, that could be brought forward, they might meet that definition, and that might include the renewals. So let's have a look at that one.
Good, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stewart. Councillor, have we got you on the line there? Otherwise,
Have you got me?
Yes, I've got you now. Sharon, go ahead.
Yes, okay. Well, Thanks, Barry. That's really good. I'm really looking forward to looking at the list. I think what you hit on before you said it's something we have to create employment, and I think whatever we're going to do, $10 million isn't a lot of money, but I think we need to create employment, and I think that's the thing that we should be really considering.
Thank you.
And looking forward to the list.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Taipari.
Kia ora, Your Worship. No questions at the moment. I just do support, however, Councillor Hill's comments around panel diversity. Thank you.
Yep. Unfortunately, we don't constitute the panel. The central government does, so that's a little out of our control. Councillor Walker.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. Just like to endorse the comments that Pippa and some others have made around things that go to the looming climate crisis. The other comment I'd make is as much as the government may be focused on big projects, we know that most of the businesses in Auckland are small businesses, and many of the projects are smaller projects that we can get happening quickly. So by all means, let's feed in, but let's give the government a bit of a snapshot of some other stuff. The other comment that I'd make in terms of criteria is quite obviously over the coming months, we're not going to have so much transport activity around Auckland. So there's a good opportunity to pick up things that might otherwise be quite disruptive, and I'm thinking of things in the central city area, so that when we come out, we're not facing so much ongoing disruption there.
Yeah, thank you for that point, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I guess for me, I'd just state the obvious, in that I think this sort of exercise is very difficult when we don't know what sort of hand we're going to be dealt with the COVID-19. Yeah. So, and that goes to Desley Simpson's comments about a whole raft of projects, infrastructure projects, which have been through the ringer and which, might be under threat, and, when we actually do come out of that. So far from jumping into a swag of whole new stuff, there might be stuff that we want to get done, but is challenged by our financial situation. So I'd make that point first of all. My question, which I'd look for clarification through Barry from the government, is what is their infrastructure strategy to these big projects that they have already approved, that they have signalled that that they're looking to bring on as fast as they can anyway. So are they making it very explicit to us what projects that they've already ostensibly approved, that they're looking to start next year anyway, with the likes of Penlink? Are they going to spell out very clearly what their strategy is for those projects in terms of timing?
I'll try and answer that. They may do at the moment on a very specific set of opportunities. So it's not broad. They have an overarching strategy. This is about projects that deliver benefits quickly and get people back into the workforce. So it's quite specific what they're aiming for here.
And they have said, Councillor, that these projects are on top of the upgrade infrastructure program that they announced 2 months ago. So I think it is something that will have a fairly instant effect. That's the critical thing that they're looking at. Okay, Councillor Young.
No question, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Look, we'll go back in the reverse order for comments. Probably there won't be a lot of comments at this point, so please.
Well, Mayor, Chris Darby here. Can I just ask another question of Barry, please?
Yeah, sure.
Barry, there were two parts to the letter from the chair of the infrastructure group, Mr. Binns. The second part intrigued me as well. The first primary question was about the construction-ready projects, but there was a second question in there about identifying changes required to existing laws and processes to overcome obstacles to project starts. So has that been conveyed to us clearly that there's an invitation for Auckland Council to feedback on what we might need to change in terms of our planning rules or regulatory processes?
Kia ora, Chris. Megan here. Yes, it has. And there's actually, as you unsurprisingly, there are a number of ministries doing all sorts of work in this area. The Ministry for the Environment is leading some work, as well as other ministries like the DIA. So we are aware of that. We have, as staff, had the opportunity to consider whether we think there's any legislative changes that could assist. But also, happy to answer any other questions on that. All we've been asked is what opportunities we think there might be.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Look, we'll have an offline discussion about that then. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a brief discussion, a call from the Minister for the Environment this morning, and the sense that I got from him was that this will link in with the resource management review, and what they want to do is they want the projects, but they want to know that our systems for processing those projects are fit for purpose and best practice. So I think that's where that's coming from. Okay, just coming back to comments, again, if you feel the need to make them. Councillor Young?
No comment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Of a crisis that is of an indeterminate length. I understand the rationale, but I just think from our perspective, we have to be quite clear and considered in what we put up, because coming down the line, there might be greater needs.
Thank you. Councillor Walker? Mic on, please, Councillor.
No comment.
Thank you. Chair Taipere?
No comment, Your Worship.
Councillor Stewart?
No comment.
Councillor Simpson?
No comment.
Councillor Sayers?
Thank you, Worship. No comment.
Councillor Newman?
No comment.
Councillor Mulholland?
No comments.
Councillor Hills?
Yes, I do have a comment. Yeah, this is will be transformational. This is what is going to bring people and help bring people out of what is the lowest of lows we've probably, ever feel in my lifetime. So I think, my comments around diversity, I know we don't have control over that, but I think we should be giving feedback on that. Having no Māori and no woman in that room making those decisions about the future of what our communities look like is hugely concerning to me. The other things, if we pick things that are out of sync, and as many have said, we should be pushing forward our current work program, whether it's water, whether it's public transport, whether it's walking and cycling. If we have a long time of unemployment, people are going to be using our communities completely differently. We've already seen that with the walking and cycling happening in our own communities at the moment. I just think we need to be strong on what we want out of this and what we want to see right across our community. I do have concerns we're just going to stick in some roads and not really think about the long-term plan, because there is going to be significant downturn in immigration if we have immigration anytime soon. The growth we'll be expecting will be coming from other areas. I do think we should be putting forward things that aren't technically shovel-ready off the book right now, because there will be lots of designers, architects, draftspeople, whatever, who are willing to do quick work and get things. It can't just be about the big companies getting their big projects, which are in the pipeline anyway. So it's I think we have to have a diverse look at what our projects are within the community space, environment space. I think we need to be looking creatively. I'll be thinking about that too. So I'm not trying to be over extreme about this, but we can get this right, and we can make this something that is for everyone in our community, or we could end up with just doing the same things for an economy that is probably going to look completely different. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to let everyone know that Councillor Cooper and I will be very strong in how we see things, and you look forward to our colleagues' support on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Henare.
Oh, yeah, Your Worship, just I suppose a comment about not so much what projects and things, but where does the idea sit of remember we used to have Council Works Department and that, where does that idea sit in this? Or ideas of, say, I don't know, Ministry of Works, blah, 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 but under a council regime?
I have seen speculation on that, Toe, but I don't know any of us can comment on what might be in the government's mind at the moment. I can't. Yeah,
no, just putting it out there. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. No,
Thank you.
Did note it. Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
No, it's all been said.
Thank you. Councillor Philippine?
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, just firstly, you mentioned earlier around the equity issue, so that is going to be key in regard to these projects. I have no doubt at all that the southern councillors will be, again, also like the western counterparts, pushing for those projects that will actually deliver the equity. Councillor Collins ended up mentioning the local board, so a process that we are moving forward and sharing that with the local boards are going to be key, and the key in the fact that I think from our perspective is that they're on the journey with us in regard to these projects. So look, I look forward to it. I look forward to the projects that are going to come to the emergency committee for us to make a decision on, and especially those, I think, that it's been mentioned around the NZTA subsidy and delivery of them. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, and it's a good point. If councillors can liaise with their local board chairs, because you've had the fuller briefing on this, that would be very helpful. And, you know, the projects we put forward, I think either way, we'll still have something of a smorgasbord of projects that the government will ultimately be able to choose between. The message that I've got from ministers, plural, is better to have too much than too little, but that really depends on our ability as our officers have the time to actually develop the projects so that they are fully baked. Councillor Darby, any further comment?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Just briefly, there's been some really good points raised in the questions that have been put to Barry. And I probably want to go back to a point that a number have made. Councillor Simpson, thank you, reminding us that we actually do have a baseline program, and that should be where we first look. I want to politely put that this is not a pick and mix opportunity. If we approach it that way, it'll be disarray, and the government will ignore that pick and mix opportunity. It has to be well founded. And I think our criteria overlaid with the government criteria will make it a powerful package. We've got a number of plans in places and work programs galore that we need to first look at. And I stress that this is not about quantity. This is about quality and long-lasting, enduring projects that are going to meet, as I've said before and others have outlined, a very different future. So some things may not be as relevant as we once thought they were. I'm keen to see some of those smaller projects bundled up, those under $10 million projects, so that they can meet that $10 million threshold. I would hope that we can stimulate the construction sector where there's small operators that are likely to stimulate those very local communities and not just the big boy operators, the big boy construction companies. We need to make sure we leverage multiple benefits here. It's just not economic benefits. The document clearly outlines that there is an expectation of clear public benefit, social benefit, and our people expect that of us. Look, lastly, I would hope that our chief economist is in the mix on this as well, because the contributions there would be quite valuable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dalton.
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Cooper.
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Councillor Coombe.
Thank you. I would like to endorse the comments that have already been made, and it's great to hear that there's seems to be an alignment of thinking in terms of the approach that's needed, and the fact that we need to actually have our own Auckland Council criteria, even if that takes it, raises the bar above what the government's put out. So I'd like to endorse those comments, and also what you said, Mr. Mayor, in terms of creating a legacy for the city that's inclusive of all Aucklanders, and that everybody will benefit. So thank you to Barry for the update. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a few comments. I wanted to reiterate and endorse the comments that have been made about the equity, social lens, climate lens overlay that we apply to any of our projects. I think one of the challenges we face is we're all going to be in a new space, an evolving space when we come out of lockdown and when we're ready to go ahead with these projects. And it's getting ourselves to think as to what that new space might look like, might be for our community, and what the projects are that are going to fit into allowing that new space to be created. So I think that's where I'm challenged with my thinking, and I know that Chair Lawton Foley and has already sent emails that has got Councillor Filipina and myself thinking about how that new space might look and what the projects might be for that new space once we come out of lockdown. I'm heading into a meeting with Panuku on Monday afternoon, and I think it's just important that people are aware of that. Obviously, they'll be thinking about what some of their projects are, and I'll be interested to see where they're coming from. And just finally, I know we're trying to be as quick and efficient as possible, but I'm always challenged by shovel-ready timelines. And so when the announcement was made, and I saw it yesterday, I thought, this is great. But I think it's important that we're given a bit of space just to allow people to think, to reflect on the baseline projects we have at the moment and what the new space would look like. And just finally, I have to endorse the words of Councillor Hills just around the diversity level of this panel. I know that that's not our panel, it's a government panel, but I think we should be feeding into those ministers some feedback as to how our nation is going to be different. Our society will be very different, but we can't just keep depending on the same types of panels to make these kinds of decisions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Endorse the comments of Thursday Simpson. We've done a lot of work already around prioritisation of projects through ATAP, through our community facilities work program and our asset renewals program. So we need to use that, have some intuitive ways where we bundle projects up to actually present them in an attractive package to the crowd. And perhaps there are going to be some new thinking projects out there that we haven't actually looked at with any depth until this point in time and take this opportunity up. So I think we have a good opportunity, Mr. Mayor, and we need to headline it with our criteria as well as the government. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Casey.
Hi, Phil. I agree with everybody else that the government needs to celebrate diversity better and maybe make a few urgent additions to the panel. We could help with some suggestions for that. And I'll be talking with Harry Doig and Pookie Tapapa and Margie Watson and Albert Eden with regard to the infrastructure projects, and I'm looking forward to that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bartley.
I don't have any comments, sorry.
Thank you. Look, that's been really useful, I think, to our officers here. The key theme coming through on this is if these are things that are going to get off the ground very quickly, they're not going to be new and totally different concepts. They're going to be things that we've done work on already, and I think that's important because to answer the specifics of the criteria that they've met, we need to show that these have been thought through and that the projects are ready to go and will have the stimulus and multiplier effect. I take on board, and I think our officers will, the importance of the environmental and the social aspects of the impact of these projects. We need the projects to be worthwhile. If they're not worthwhile, they won't be there. They need to be projects that are important to us, will have a legacy for us, and will have additionally the effect of a stimulus and a job creation outcome that will be desperately necessary at the time that we face it. We are living in a different world, but one of the things about that different world is that, you know, we've cruised along thinking we've got a relatively low level of unemployment, isn't that great? That's not going to be what the future world looks like, and it will be about how we can use the skills of our people usefully rather than casting them on the scrap heap. So that job creation aspect, and there will be a mixture of skills required in it, is vitally necessary. Okay, look, we've got, I'll move and ask somebody to second that we receive the verbal update.
I'll second, thanks.
Summary, Deputy Mayor seconded, and that also the other recommendation that we note the response by the Council to COVID-19. I don't think I need a division vote on that. If I just do it by voices, if I can. Those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary? Great, thank you. That's very clear. Look, I think we've only got one item left on the agenda. It should be reasonably straightforward. I know that jinxes any suggestion of it being dealt with quickly, but I will move that we exclude public and any staff not necessary for the discussion of this item online. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Seconded by Councillor Dalton, I think. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. Carried. And if we can just take 2 minutes so that we can then move into exclusion and guarantee that. But with the permission of the councillors, we'll just deal with this last item under confidential rather than having a half-hour break. So unless somebody objects fundamentally to that.